Amaka stood in her cluttered room, hands on her hips, surveying the chaos. She had decided it was finally time to declutter. Her wardrobe was overflowing with clothes she hadn't worn in years. Some were faded, others out of style, but most were still in good condition. She had heard about donation drives and thought it was a good idea to give the clothes to people in need. With determination, she pulled out shirts, dresses, and jeans, piling them into bags. As she sorted through the items, memories flooded back. There was the dress she wore to her cousin's wedding, the scarf gifted by her late grandmother, and a sweater she'd worn during her first job interview. Nostalgia tugged at her, but she shook it off. These clothes could help someone else now, she reasoned. By evening, the bags were ready, neatly lined up by the door. Amaka's mind was at ease. It felt good to think of her clothes finding new homes. But as she closed her eyes that night, a strange unease settled over her, a faint feeling that she couldn't explain. The following morning, Amaka loaded the bags into her car and drove to a community center known for its charity work. The center's head, Mama Ngozi, greeted her warmly and thanked her for her generosity. Amaka felt a swell of pride as she watched the volunteers carry the bags inside. "Your clothes will surely bring smiles to many faces," Mama Ngozi assured her. But as Amaka returned to her car, she noticed a man standing across the street, watching her intently. He wore tattered clothes and had a strange intensity in his eyes. Feeling uneasy, she quickly got into her car and drove away. That night, her dreams were restless. She saw her old clothes scattered across unfamiliar places and shadowy figures whispering her name. She woke up startled, her unease growing stronger. Amaka couldn't shake the image of the man she had seen outside the community center. His piercing gaze lingered in her mind. 2 days later, as she walked to the market, she saw him again. This time, he was closer, leaning against a wall near a vendor's stall. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a faint, unsettling smile. Amaka's heart raced. She quickened her pace, pretending not to notice, but she could feel his eyes following her. She stopped at a fabric seller's stand, pretending to browse, hoping he would lose interest and leave. "Are you looking for something specific, madam?" the seller asked, sensing her distraction. "No, just looking," Amaka mumbled, her focus still on the man. But when she glanced back, he was gone. Feeling both relieved and disturbed, she decided to cut her shopping trip short. On her way home, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder every few minutes, half expecting to see him again. That night, she double-checked the locks on her doors and windows before going to bed. The next morning, Amaka received a call from Mama Ngozi. "Amaka, my dear, thank you again for your donation," Mama Ngozi began. "But I wanted to ask, did you mean to include a red scarf in the bags? It's unusual." Amaka frowned. "A red scarf? No, I don't remember packing one. It's very distinct," Mama Ngozi continued. "It looks handmade with intricate stitching." Some of the volunteers felt uneasy about it. One of them swore they saw it move on its own. Amaka's stomach tightened. She remembered the scarf her late grandmother had gifted her. It was red with intricate patterns, but she had kept it in a box, not with her clothes. "I'll come by and take a look," Amaka offered, her voice shaky. When she arrived at the center, Mama Ngozi showed her the scarf. It was indeed her grandmother's. Amaka's hands trembled as she held it. How had it ended up in the donation bags? And why did it feel unusually cold to the touch? As Amaka examined the red scarf, a volunteer named Kemi approached cautiously. "Madam, I don't mean to alarm you, but there's something odd about that scarf," Kemi said in a hushed tone. "Since it arrived, some of us have been feeling uneasy. One of the boys said he heard whispers whenever he was near it." Amaka's chest tightened. "Whispers? Are you sure?" Kemi nodded, her expression serious. "Please take it back with you. We've done our part in sorting donations, but it's not normal." Reluctantly, Amaka agreed. She carefully folded the scarf and placed it in her bag. As she drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. She checked her rearview mirror repeatedly, but the roads were empty. At home, she placed the scarf on her dining table, staring at it as if it would reveal its secrets. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was a text from an unknown number. "You should have left it alone." Amaka's heart pounded. Who could have sent the message? And what did it mean? That night, as Amaka sat in her living room, her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello," she said cautiously. There was silence on the other end, followed by a faint sound, like someone breathing. Then a raspy voice spoke. "Return it." Amaka's hand trembled. "Who is this?" she demanded. But the line went dead. She stared at her phone, her mind racing. Was this connected to the scarf? Or the man she had seen near the community center? Determined to get answers, she decided to investigate. The first step was finding out if the scarf had a deeper story. She needed to talk to someone who knew her grandmother well, someone who might understand what was happening. The next morning, Amaka decided to visit her Auntie Ikit, her grandmother's younger sister. Auntie Ikit was known for her deep knowledge of family history and her superstitious beliefs. If anyone could shed light on the scarf, it would be her. "This scarf?" Ikit asked, examining it with furrowed brows. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it. "Ah, Amaka, this belonged to your grandmother, but it is no ordinary scarf. She always said it carried a heavy spirit." Amaka's eyes widened. "A heavy spirit? What does that mean?" Ikit sighed, placing the scarf down carefully. "Your grandmother received this as a gift from an old friend, a woman known for her powerful charms. She warned your grandmother to treat it with respect and never to let it fall into the wrong hands. When your grandmother passed, I thought it had been destroyed." Amaka's heart raced as Ikit continued. "If you have it now, someone must want it, someone who knows its power. Be careful, my child. This scarf is not just cloth. It carries a story of betrayal and pain." On her way back home, Amaka's mind was racing with questions. What kind of power could the scarf hold? Who could possibly want it now? Her thoughts were interrupted when she noticed the man from before, standing at the corner of her street. This time, he did not just stare. He began walking toward her car. Panicking, Amaka pressed the accelerator and sped into her compound, locking the gate behind her. She peered through the window, but the man had disappeared again. She called Auntie Ikit, her voice trembling. The uneasy quiet of the night was shattered by a sudden knock on Amaka's door. It was past midnight, and her heart thudded in her chest. Who could be visiting her at this hour? Gathering courage, she tiptoed to the door and peeked through the peephole. There was no one there. She hesitated before opening the door slightly, peering outside. The street was empty, bathed in the dim glow of a flickering streetlight. Shaking her head, she closed the door and locked it securely. But just as she turned away, her phone buzzed. It was another text from the unknown number. "Open the door. I'm waiting." Fear coursed through her veins as she checked the peephole again. This time, she saw a shadowy figure standing under the streetlight, motionless. The figure raised a hand slowly, pointing directly at her door. Panicking, Amaka closed the curtains and called Auntie Ikit. "Annie, he's here," she whispered frantically. "Do not let him in, no matter what he says," Ikit instructed firmly. "The scarf binds him. He cannot take it without your consent. Do not engage. Keep it close until morning." Amaka stayed awake all night, clutching the scarf as she sat in the corner of her room. The figure eventually disappeared, but her sense of dread lingered long after the first light of dawn broke through her window. Determined to uncover more about the scarf, Amaka rummaged through her grandmother's belongings stored in an old trunk in her attic. Among the faded photos and handwritten letters, she discovered a small leather-bound journal. Flipping through its yellowed pages, she found entries describing her grandmother's friendship with a woman named Adora, a skilled seamstress and healer who had gifted her the scarf. One entry caught Amaka's eye. "The scarf is a bond, both protective and binding. It was woven with Adora's final blessings. I must keep it safe from those who would twist its purpose." The journal also mentioned a man who had sought the scarf years ago, claiming it could break a curse placed on his family. Her grandmother had refused, fearing his intentions. Amaka's heart sank as she realized the man following her could be tied to this story. She needed to find out more about him and why he wanted the scarf. But she also knew time was running out. The danger was closing in. With the journal in one hand and the scarf in the other, Amaka resolved to seek help, but from whom, she wasn't yet sure. The following morning, Amaka examined the scarf closely, hoping to uncover a clue about its significance. As sunlight streamed through her window, she noticed faint symbols woven into the fabric, patterns she had never paid attention to before. They looked like ancient markings, unlike anything she had seen. Determined to learn more, Amaka took the scarf to an art historian at the local university. Dr. Nduka, an expert in African artifacts, listened intently as she explained its history. When he saw the scarf, his face turned pale. "These symbols are not mere decorations," Dr. Nduka said, adjusting his glasses. "They are glyphs associated with protection and power. Whoever made this scarf knew what they were doing." "What kind of power?" Amaka asked nervously. "The kind that can shield or harm, depending on who possesses it. This is a rare artifact, and I wouldn't be surprised if people are willing to go to great lengths to get it." Amaka's stomach churned. "So, what should I do?" "Keep it safe," Dr. Nduka advised, "and avoid anyone who shows interest in it. Some things are better left untouched." As Amaka left the university, she felt the weight of the scarf grow heavier. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, and she was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. That evening, Amaka's phone buzzed with a message from an old friend, Chitty, who worked as a private investigator. She had confided in him the previous week about her unease, and he had decided to visit her. "Amaka, this sounds serious," Chitty said after she recounted everything. "The man following you and the strange messages. It's no coincidence." "Let me help you." Amaka hesitated but eventually agreed. She showed him the scarf and told him about the warnings from Annie Ikit and Dr. Nduka. Chitty examined it carefully, his expression serious. "This isn't just about the scarf," he said. "It's about what it represents. I'll do some digging to see if there's a connection between your grandmother's past and this man." Amaka felt a flicker of hope. With Chitty's expertise and Auntie Ikit's guidance, she believed they could uncover the truth. But deep down, she knew they had to act quickly. Time was running out, and danger was closing in. The next few nights were filled with unease. Amaka had taken Annie Ikit's advice to hide the scarf, burying it under an old mango tree far from her home. But even after doing so, she could not shake the feeling of being watched. One evening, as she returned home from work, she found a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth on her doorstep. Her breath caught as she unwrapped it. Inside was the same red scarf she had buried. Amaka staggered back, her legs trembling. How was this possible? She had buried it deep enough that no one could have found it so quickly. Who would go to such lengths to return it to her? She called Auntie Ikit immediately. "Annie, it's back," she whispered, her voice shaking. Ikit's tone was sharp. "Do not touch it again. This has gone beyond the physical. Whoever seeks the scarf is close, and they will stop at nothing. You must leave your house tonight and come to me." Amaka grabbed a small bag of essentials and left her house, feeling the weight of invisible eyes on her. As she drove to Ikit's home, she saw fleeting shadows in her peripheral vision. But when she looked, there was nothing. Ikit welcomed her with open arms. "Stay here tonight," she said. "We need to find a way to sever this connection for good." Amaka nodded, her heart heavy with fear. The scarf was no longer just an object. It was a curse binding her to forces she couldn't understand. Amaka sat in the dimly lit room of Auntie Ikit's house, her heart racing with dread. The air felt thick, as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting. Ikit sat across from her, a solemn expression on her face. "You've done well to come here, Amaka," Ikit said, her voice low. "The scarf is no ordinary item. It is tied to a powerful spirit, one that feeds on fear and pain." Amaka shivered, the cold in her bones deepening. "But why me? I'm just an ordinary person." Ikit shook her head slowly. "Ordinary or not, the spirit has chosen you. There's something about your past, something it has latched onto. We need to uncover it before it consumes you." Amaka's mind raced. She had always tried to keep her past buried, things she thought were long forgotten. Could they be connected to the scarf? To the spirit? The memories were like half-formed shadows in her mind. Something troubling, yet just out of reach. Auntie Ikit reached for a small wooden box on the shelf and opened it. Inside, there was a collection of herbs, stones, and candles. items Amaka had seen before in her aunt's spiritual practices. Ikit pulled out a piece of dried sage, lighting it with a match. "Sit with me, Amaka," she said softly. "Let us see the truth." Amaka hesitated, then nodded and sat beside her aunt. The scent of burning sage filled the room, and the air seemed to thicken further, as if the house was pressing in on them. Ikit began to chant softly, her words strange and rhythmic, while Amaka closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. As the chanting grew louder, Amaka felt a strange sensation, like something was stirring in her chest. The room began to shift around her, the walls warping, and shadows stretched unnaturally long. Then, in the darkness, she saw something, a figure, tall, with glowing eyes that pierced through the gloom. It spoke in a voice that sent chills down her spine. "You cannot hide from me forever." Amaka gasped and opened her eyes, heart pounding. She was back in the room with Auntie Ikit, but the vision lingered. "The spirit has shown itself to you," Ikit said softly. "It is more than a curse, it is a pact. And that pact was made long before you ever encountered the scarf." Amaka swallowed hard, her throat dry. "What do I have to do? How can I stop it?" Ikit closed her eyes, as if in deep concentration. "There is a ritual, one that will sever the bond between you and the spirit. But it will not be easy. The spirit will fight, and it will not let go without a struggle." Amaka nodded. She had no choice. She had to fight back, no matter the cost. The spirit had already come too close, and she could feel its malevolent presence hovering over her life. "Tonight, we will begin," Ikit said, her voice resolute. "Prepare yourself, Amaka. The journey to rid yourself of this curse is only just beginning." The night was eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft crackling of the burning sage. Amaka sat with Auntie Ikit, her heart heavy with uncertainty. The darkness outside seemed deeper than usual, and the shadows in the room flickered and danced as if alive, responding to the ritual that was about to begin. Ikit opened a small leather pouch and pulled out a collection of objects: black thread, a knife with an ivory handle, a silver mirror, and a bowl of water. She placed them carefully in front of Amaka, her movements precise and deliberate. "These are the tools you will need to sever your connection with the spirit," Ikit said, her voice calm but stern. "The thread will bind the spirit, the knife will cut the tie, and the mirror will reflect its true form. The water will cleanse you once the bond is broken." Amaka looked at the objects, a knot of dread tightening in her chest. "What do I need to do?" Ikit gestured for her to sit in front of the mirror. "Close your eyes, take deep breaths, and focus. Visualize the spirit, the one that has been haunting you, and hold that image in your mind. When you are ready, open your eyes and face the mirror." Amaka nodded, closing her eyes. She tried to steady her breathing, but the memories of the spirit's glowing eyes and its chilling voice flooded her thoughts. She could feel its presence again, a cold, oppressive weight that seemed to press in on her chest. She opened her eyes and gazed into the mirror. For a moment, there was nothing, just her reflection staring back at her. But then the air grew heavy, and slowly, the reflection began to shift. The edges of her face blurred, and she saw a figure appear behind her in the mirror. It was tall, cloaked in shadow, its glowing eyes fixed on her. The spirit was there, just as it had been in her vision. "You're still here," Amaka whispered, her voice trembling. The spirit's voice echoed in the room, low and menacing. "You cannot escape me. I am bound to you, and you will be mine." Amaka's pulse raced, but she remembered Auntie Ikit's words. "Focus. Visualize the severing of the tie." She grabbed the black thread and began to tie it around her wrist, her fingers shaking. She imagined the thread as a binding force that held the spirit to her, the connection between them. Slowly, she tied the knot, and the thread pulsed with an unnatural energy, as though something in the room responded to it. The spirit seemed to recoil, its glowing eyes flickering in anger. "You cannot break our bond," it hissed. Amaka took a deep breath and reached for the knife. She could feel the weight of it in her hand, its ivory handle cool against her skin. She held the blade above the thread, trembling with fear but resolute in her purpose. "Now," Ikit said, her voice sharp. "Cut the tie, Amaka." Sever the connection. With a steady hand, Amaka sliced the thread in one swift motion. A surge of energy pulsed through the room. The shadows seemed to writhe, and the spirit let out a deafening scream. The mirror cracked, and the air grew cold, the temperature dropping rapidly as if the room itself were being torn apart. Amaka gasped for air, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the spirit's presence fading, its hold on her loosening. But she knew it wasn't over yet. There was one final step. "Now, the water," Ikit urged. Amaka dipped her fingers into the bowl of water, her hands shaking as she sprinkled it over the shards of the broken mirror. As the water touched the pieces, a blinding light filled the room, and the spirit let out a final, guttural roar before dissolving into the air, leaving only silence behind. For a moment, Amaka sat there, frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long was gone. The suffocating presence of the spirit had vanished. Ikit smiled gently at her. "You've done it, Amaka. The curse is broken." Amaka looked down at her hands, the remnants of the black thread still clinging to her wrist. She felt lighter, freer, but the fear that had consumed her for so long still lingered in her heart. She knew that she would never be the same, that something deep within her had changed. But as she looked at Annie Ikit, she saw only peace in her eyes. The ritual had worked. The spirit was gone, and the bond was severed. "Thank you, Annie," Amaka whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Ikit reached out and pulled her into a tight embrace. "You are stronger than you know, Amaka. And now you are free." Amaka closed her eyes, letting the weight of the moment wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly at peace. But deep in the back of her mind, a thought lingered, a warning. Not all curses are so easily broken. The following days passed in a blur. Amaka moved through her routine with a newfound lightness, no longer burdened by the oppressive presence of the spirit. She had returned to her home, but the silence felt different now. Peaceful, almost reassuring. Still, something deep inside her wouldn't let go of the lingering feeling that the battle wasn't entirely over. Auntie Ikit had warned her that not all curses were so easily broken, but Amaka had hoped that the ritual would be the final step in her ordeal. Yet, there was a quiet whisper in her thoughts, a voice she couldn't quite ignore. Was it really gone? She wondered. Or is it waiting for a way back? One evening, as Amaka was reading a book in her living room, she noticed a strange flicker of movement in the corner of her eye. She turned quickly, but there was nothing, just the shadows of her room stretching out in the fading light. But then, the doorbell rang. Amaka froze. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. With cautious steps, she walked to the door and peered through the peephole. To her surprise, there was no one standing outside. Instead, a small bundle, wrapped in faded cloth, lay at her feet. Her heart raced. The scarf. She hadn't seen it in days. She knelt down and carefully unwrapped the cloth, her fingers trembling as she pulled the familiar red scarf from the bundle. It was the same one she had buried, the same one that had returned to her before. But this time, something was different. The scarf seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if alive, responding to her touch. Amaka's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the same cold presence creeping in, like a shadow over her soul. The spirit had returned, but this time she was ready. She knew that she couldn't rely solely on Auntie Ikit's rituals. She had to take control. The spirit had preyed on her fear and uncertainty before, and she couldn't let it do so again. Amaka grabbed the scarf and marched to the backyard. The old mango tree loomed in the distance, the place where she had buried it before. She could feel the ground beneath her feet, solid and unmoving, as though it was calling to her, urging her to finish what she had started. When she reached the tree, she dug into the soil with her hands, unearthing the spot where she had hidden the scarf. As her fingers brushed against the earth, she whispered a quiet incantation, a prayer she had learned from Auntie Ikit. The air around her shifted, The wind began to pick up, swirling around her with increasing intensity. Amaka tightened her grip on the scarf and held it up to the sky. "You have no power over me anymore," she said firmly. "I am no longer afraid." The spirit's voice echoed in the air, sharp and mocking. "You think you are free? You are nothing but a pawn. The curse has already marked you. There is no escape." Amaka's heart beat faster, but she didn't back down. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had to remember the lessons from the ritual. The power was not just in the objects or the words, but in her belief, her strength, her will. With one final cry, Amaka threw the red scarf high into the air. The wind caught it, lifting it higher and higher, until it vanished into the night sky. The spirit screamed in fury, its voice fading as if it was being pulled away by an invisible force. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if the earth itself exhaled, the air around her settled. The wind died down, and the ground beneath her feet felt steady, unmoving. She opened her eyes and looked around. There was no shadow, no lingering presence. It was gone. Amaka stood there, breathless but triumphant. The curse was finally over. The spirit had been cast away, not by rituals or relics, but by her own courage, by her refusal to let fear control her any longer. She walked back to the house, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The weight of the past had lifted, and the future lay before her, open and full of possibilities. But as Amaka closed the door behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just passed a test, one that had changed her, one that had shown her the strength she never knew she had. In the stillness of her home, she whispered to herself, "I am free." And for the first time in a long time, she truly believed it. Thank you for watching. Kindly share your thoughts in the comment section. Remember to like, share, follow, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos.